Good afternoon, and this is Justice for All. I'm George Yates. Thank you for joining us, and if you're going to be with us for the next few minutes, you're going to have a great time. If you're interested in what we cover every week, which is the criminal justice system in America, this is Justice for All. I'm your host. I'm a lawyer during the week, and come here on Saturdays to do my public service, to draw attention to criminal justice issues, and hopefully by drawing some attention to some of the problems we have with our criminal justice system through some of my guests, we can maybe do something to affect some positive change in our justice system, and with respect to courts and punishments and all sorts of stuff like that. And today we have two guests on the show today that are instrumental in both of those themes. Neil Barsky is with us. He's our first guest today. He's the founder of the Marshall Project, which is an organization near and dear to those of us in my business. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization covering America's criminal justice system. And it's a lot of its articles and projects are being picked up by mainstream media and drawing attention to some of the problems in American society with respect to the criminal justice system itself. So to tell us a little bit more about the Marshall Project and some of the stuff that they are working on, I'm inviting here to the show Mr. Neil Barsky. How you doing, Neil?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me today.
For those of you that just joined us, Neil is the founder and chairman of the Marshall Project. He was a former newspaper reporter, a hedge fund manager. I guess made some money doing that and decided to do some. Now you're a do-gooder. And
one hopes.
And anyway, the Marshall Project. We had you on the show earlier, and we had some technical problems. I don't think we actually got you on the air. So here we are. How are things going? Tell our listeners what the Marshall Project is, how you started, and what your plans are.
Sure. I mean, the Marshall, as you said, George, the Marshall Project is a journalism organization. We cover criminal justice in all its forms. We're digital. We publish a website. We, have our social media outlets, but we also, as you mentioned, partner with major news organizations like NPR or Frontline or the New York Times or the Washington Post, and they will partner with us, and so through that we will reach a much larger audience. The motive for the Marshall Project is very consistent with what you said earlier. As you said, I was in the financial world. I had retired a few years ago. And I this is not a revelation to you or most of your listeners, but I came to the conclusion that a lot of Americans have had, which is that the criminal justice system is a national disgrace, and it's broken. And I felt there was this huge sense of complacency, like we just accept things that, if you really give it some thought, you would never accept in a democratic society. And because there were so many advocates and excellent organizations already doing direct work, I felt a journalism organization that wrote about it and covered this issue in scale could help elevate the issue of criminal justice to one of national urgency and reform. And so it's, we don't have demonstrations, we are not lawyers, we don't litigate, we don't even advocate. But what we do is we cover stories that many reasonable Americans would conclude, well, this is outrageous. And I think we're being effective in a very subtle way. I think things have changed last year, partly because of horrible events that have happened with policing and things like that, but partly because the politicians, even on the right, are realizing that that our system is a scandal and a violation of our Constitution. And I do think, and you can look in Congress, and there are a lot of examples of small victories, I do think things are changing slowly.
Well, your organization is named after the late, great Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall, and that was your theme. And you were inspired by some books that really convinced you that our modern criminal justice system is really just one more extension of oppression of African Americans in the country. But when you start talking about the criminal justice system and the problems that we have with it, I mean, it's just, if you were to go down and just make a long laundry list of problems or ills, just to summarize for our listeners, where do you think, let's say if you were going to pick the 5 or 6 or 10
Sure.
areas. Where is such a problem? You say everybody is agreed, or a lot of people, both on the left and the right, agree. Where do we focus if we want to try to reform our criminal justice system? Where do you start?
Okay, that's fair, but I'll answer the first part of your question first. Sort of list the 10 things that are wrong. Some of these, and this is just me speaking. This is not the Marshall Project, right? So as I said, we are nonpartisan, and not everybody agrees with everything everyone says. But I would say, first of all, the criminal justice system doesn't work. How is that? It doesn't make us safer, and it doesn't rehabilitate people who are in the system. So it's a failure on a sort of an efficacy basis. And I don't want to be, I don't want to sound cold, but people, we take kids who may have screwed up and go to juvenile detention, and they go to adult prison. And what happens? They become hardened criminals because we take these kids who are 17 and 18, and we put them as hardened criminals. They come out, and they go into their communities with no skills. And so they become part of this system.
They've got a felony record, so they're unemployable. And that makes it even worse. The felony record thing is what kills people now.
Right. And so that's number one. So it doesn't work. Number two is it doesn't really make us safer. Now, here, this is my opinion. I mean, the social science would go both ways, but most studies will show, we've had a plummeting crime rate, fortunately, in many big cities in America. And that's because of better policing. It's because of demographics. It's because of the decline of crack. It's because of a lot of factors. But nobody, and not even the most conservative criminologists, would say it's principally because we've thrown everybody in jail. Because, as I said, we're not throwing people in jail. There's, most people, I'm generalizing here, but they're churning through the system. They're back on the street. They're off on the street. But number two, so it doesn't make us safer. And I can go on from there. So, and frankly, it's racist. When I say it's racist, I don't mean that everything that happens is the product of race hatred. What I mean is, in general, you are treated differently. I'm making a generalization, but one that I would defend. One is treated differently because of one's race and one's class in our system. And there's so much evidence of that in the general and in the specific that we can all point to that we've seen. So, I'm an old-fashioned liberal. I'm not radical. I don't believe in revolution, but I do believe in our Constitution. I do believe we should have a race-blind society the best we can. And so the system has disproportionately affected African Americans. It disproportionately affects the poor, obviously. And I could go on and on. It's backed by, we have the privatization of prisons with people making money off of incarcerated people, not again for the betterment of society, but because of an economic arrangement that has been made between states and private prison companies. We've criminalized all this behavior. We are the only country in the world that has, not the only country, but we have criminalized so much behavior that really should be health issue. Let's say drugs. Okay, I mean, drugs, I'll go on a limb. I say, addictive drugs are bad. They're bad for you. This is a health issue. Instead of addressing it and attacking it as a healthcare issue where we can help people, we criminalize behavior. And so we have a whole generation of people incarcerated for doing what really shouldn't, in my opinion, necessarily be criminal behavior. Same with mental health. As you probably know, in the 1960s and 70s, there was a deinstitutionalization of many mentally ill people, and they were dumped on the street. In the past, we were able to forcibly take mentally ill people and force them to be in mental hospitals. I'm not saying that was a good policy, but as a result, people with mental health issues often find themselves in jails and get treatment in jails or in prisons. And, of course, that totally distorts things and does no one any good. As you can imagine, I can talk for a long time on all that's ill, but I'll tell you what we can do quickly. If you asked me earlier about solutions, because it isn't as easy. You understand that we have 50 states. Most, I think, about 85 or 90% of people who are incarcerated are in state prisons, not federal prisons. So it's not like the president can make radical, dramatic change.
Right.
That said, there is a bill in front of the Congress which will be passed in, which I believe alters mandatory minimums. One of the worst things that happened in the 80s and 90s was that all these states passed these laws where they took away discretion from the judges. When you're accused of a crime, they said, if you do this, you have to go to jail for this. And they made these very, very long mandatory minimums for various crimes. So what happens? Number one, judges have no discretion. In other words, if there's extenuating circumstances, you have to be sentenced. And two, no one's going to go to trial. No one's going to go to trial because the stakes are so high. So you have this rash of plea bargains, even of people who might not have done anything. So
tell me about it. That's what we have to do it all the time, because the prosecutors will say, well, you can either take this deal or we're just going to indict him on 4 other counts right here that all carry 5-year mandatory minimums. So you better take the deal that's offered, even though you might have a defense to it, but because you can't take it, you can't take the risk.
Exactly. So that's something that, again, unfortunately,
and the power is now shifted to the prosecutors from the judges because of that. They pass these mandatory minimum statutes, so the amount of time that somebody does now is based upon the charging decision made by the prosecutor and not by the sentencing decision that the judge makes.
Exactly, and so there's all sorts of, now none of this stuff is going to be easy. Like I said, it's a lot of it state by state or even county by county.
So what are the solutions to race? I mean, racism is such a endemic part of our society. I mean, we can't just wave a magic wand and get rid of racism. I mean, I'm sure we can all agree on that. We're trying, I suppose, little bit by little bit.
No, we can change laws, though. We can change mandatory. The bad laws are poorly applied based on racism. So you can't. I don't think I am in a position in this conversation to address the large issue of racism.
Right.
But that's what he said.
So so we need to abolish mandatory minimums. We need to give judges more discretion. You think there should be probably a lot more probation given? I mean, number one, decriminalize more of this behavior that's been criminalized, and then the criminal behavior that is actual criminal behavior. Find more alternatives to incarceration so that the young people aren't. And what about these lengthy sentences? You get people that do something between 19 and 20. One of my biggest things for years, having practiced criminal defense for 30 years, is that you get these kids that are 19, 20, 21, 22. They're not thinking with the right brain, and they get locked up for something, and 20 years later, they've got a 40-year sentence for something, and 20 years later, they're not even the same person, and they're not a threat, and they're still sitting in prison. Something needs to be done about that, too. What
is the waste of life in our prisons? You know, we have 2.25 million people behind bars.
We've abolished parole in the federal system. We've abolished it in the state system. In Virginia, you do 85% of your sentence. You can get a 50-year sentence. You're going to do 85% of it. It's insane. It used to be, I know when I was a prosecutor, when I first started out, we had parole in Virginia. You get a 20-year sentence, you were eligible to get out after about 4 years. Now, a lot of people didn't. They might do 8. But they didn't do 85% of it. They didn't do 17 years or whatever. They did 4 or 5, and I don't see any difference. I guess are there people saying that we're safer now because of these no parole situations? It's and don't you think? I heard a friend of mine the other day, a very respected criminal defense lawyer, says, and I don't know if it's South Carolina or not, but he says that judges retain the authority over their judges you can actually petition the judge that sentenced you years later in that state. So maybe you got somebody in jail. What if you gave him a 20-year sentence but says, you know what, if you do well, why don't you petition me in 5 and we'll see whether or not I'll let you back out. Well, that gives that guy some motive to get into jail and get himself some skills or do whatever. But if you're just locking him up 20 years and not giving him any with no parole, what's the incentive for him to improve himself? So, I mean, there's so many things that we could do. Is that tell us what we've only got a few more minutes, Neil. What first of all, you're the founder of this Marshall Project. How can people find you? You're on the web, right?
Yeah. So www.themarshallproject.org is our website.
And you've got
journalists on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. And we have 25 people working there. We publish every day. So the best way is just, we also have a daily email we send out called the opening statement. You can go on our website and sign up for it. That has all of the criminal justice news, not just that we publish, but all publications, the best or most relevant on a daily basis. So that's really for the hardcore who want to sort of understand and know what's happening all around the country.
So if somebody if somebody goes onto your website and signs up, then they'll get the email automatically every day.
Exactly. Yeah. And so those are the most kind. Obviously, Twitter and Facebook, we have major presences and our partners, but that's more episodic. But, and then we'll have our reporters on TV and radio shows like yours. I think you have one of our reporters coming on later. And these are folks who are really in the field, who are doing, ground-up reporting. And a lot of these stories we do go viral. We did an interview with David Simon, the founder of The Wire, guy about Baltimore and the horrible policing in Baltimore, right in the wake of the riots, the unrest last year, and that had almost 1 million hits. We have long stories about habeas corpus and complicated inequities in the system, and we've done investigations on prisons, and particularly New York State, Attica Prison, which is a notorious prison people over a certain age might remember, about the sort of almost anarchistic environment there, where guards were accused of, and I think we've helped show that there was merit to the accusation, routinely abusing prisoners. So it's all sorts of things. We write about prison food and makeup in prison. I mean, not everything we do is sort of depressing and outrageous, but we try to cover the whole universe of criminal justice. We publish people who are incarcerated in their work.
What are you the most proud of that you've done so far with the Marshall Project?
Good question. I mean, I think, that we exist, I'm very proud of. I mean, we didn't exist. We just started publishing less than a year ago, and I think we've just made an impact in general. But more specifically, I think our series on conditions, or a series of articles we've done about New York State prisons, has led to a federal investigation of Attica, and I think it's going to lead to real changes. We've done some stories we did a story about a guy named Todd Willingham who was executed in Corsicana, Texas, in the early part of this decade, who people feel was innocent. And we did a story, I think, that increased the probability that he was. In fact, that story was cited in a New York Times dissent by Justice Breyer in the U.S. Supreme Court. So I think we're getting to a lot of the right people, and we're just getting started.
Well, thanks for joining us. We're going to split the show today between you and one of your reporters, Eli Hager. So I want to remind our listeners that we've been. I'm Justice for All, George Yates. This is Justice for All, and I've spent the last few minutes here with the founder of the Marshall Project, named after our Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. And he's founded this Marshall Project. It's a nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization, which really is going to try to do something about the problems we have in our justice system. We've heard about a little bit of them today. If you want to know more about the Marshall Project, please go on to www.themarshallproject.org. Is that what that is?
Yes. Yes.
Marshallproject.org and 2 L's, yes. Right? And sign up, and also you can donate too if you're interested in the criminal justice issues, because it's a nonprofit organization.
Correct.
And Neil's running out of money. He's tired of funding it. He needs a little help here.
We do get some help, but we always could use more. And there's a donate button on the site, and that, of course, would be very, very welcome.
Great. Well, listen, thanks, Neil. Thanks for coming on the show. We'll try to have you again sometime in the future.
My pleasure.
This is Neil Barsky. He's the founder of the Marshall Project. We're going to go to a short break. When we come back, we're going to interview Eli Hager. He is a reporter for the Marshall Project, and he's going to tell us about some of the projects that they're working on going forward. This is Justice for All.
The place for authentic Indian food is the India Palace. They feature authentic Indian cuisine, have a party hall, and do catering and banquets. Open daily for lunch and dinner, they showcase an excellent lunch buffet at their Chesapeake and Virginia Beach locations. Visit their 2 locations at 1437 Sam's Drive in Chesapeake off of Battlefield Boulevard and 5600 Virginia Beach Boulevard in Virginia Beach, and online at IndiaPalaceVB.com. On Facebook, look for India Palace Virginia Beach and India Palace Bar and Grill. Dine at the India Palace today.
Leaky faucet, refinishing old countertops? Hey, Gary Sullivan here. Perhaps you're restaining a deck or painting your living room. Whatever it is, let me help. I'm here to give you the tips you need to finish those pesky projects you've been putting off. If you're restaining, have a tip for that. Can't get the paint off the hardwood floors? Got a tip for that too. I'm here to make sure that $5 repair doesn't turn into a $500 repair. Join me right here every weekend.
Saturdays at noon, Sundays at 9 a.m. on AM 1650 WHKT, The Answer.
Hi, this is Greg Picaveras, inviting you to join me for Sports Scene live each Wednesday from noon to 1 right here on News Talk 1650 and TuneIn.com by typing WHKT in the search box. Excellent guests and interaction at Greg Bick on Twitter, all powered by HamptonRoadsOnlineMall.com. Sports Scene each Wednesday from noon to 1 right here on News Talk 1650.
Are you prepared to defend yourself and your family against any threat? Veteran-owned and operated One Shot Trading Post is ready to make sure that you are. Continuing training and classes on defense, survival, and weapons. Full gunsmithing services, special orders and financing available with military discounts. $15 transfers, and One Shot Trading Post is always looking to buy, sell, or trade. Located at 4366 Holland Road at South Plaza Trail, make sure that you're ready for anything at One Shot Trading Post, 463-5893, OneShotTradingPost.com. Starting Wednesday, November 4th, tune into the Sports Philosophy Show featuring former professional sports general manager and NCAA sports announcer Jack Ankerson, along with 22-year NCAA coach Darryl Cummings. They have unique and insightful views on sports and will talk to guests throughout the sports world. The Sports Philosophy Show can be heard each Wednesday from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time on WHKT 1650 AM in Hampton Roads and worldwide using the TuneIn.com radio app. For more information, go to thesportsphilosophishow.com.
Mi Hogar is your restaurant for the finest Mexican cuisine in Hampton Roads. At Mi Hogar, everything is prepared fresh in a casual atmosphere. Enjoy traditional favorites such as quesadillas, tacos, burritos, and fajitas, as well as refreshing beverages. Mi Hogar has 2 locations, 4201 Granby Street in Norfolk and 801 North Battlefield Boulevard in Chesapeake. Call ahead at 640-7705. At Mi Hogar, there is something for everyone.
The best of News Talk Radio, AM 1650 WHKT Portsmouth, The Answer.
Leaky faucet, refinishing old countertops? Hey, Gary Sullivan here. Perhaps you're restaining a deck or painting your living room. Whatever it is, let me help. I'm here to give you the tips you need to finish those pesky projects you've been putting off. If you're restaining, I have a tip for that. Can't get the paint off the hardwood floors? Got a tip for that too. I'm here to make sure that $5 repair doesn't turn into a $500 repair. Join me right here every weekend.
Saturdays at noon, Sundays at 9 a.m. on AM 1650 WHKT, The Answer.
Okay, we're back. I'm George Yates. This is Justice for All, and we're here from 2 to 3 on Saturdays with a show dedicated to improving the criminal justice system in America. That's kind of what we focus on every week. And if you've just joined us, that's what we do every week here is we interview experts in the criminal justice field across the country who come on my show and tell me what they think we need to do to make things better. This part of our show is brought to you by Ramon Photography. Ramon is an excellent portrait photographer. He's out at Town Center in Virginia Beach, and so if you need to get a photo done of your family, or he's the fellow that does all the portraits of the judges that hang on the walls in the Virginia Beach courthouse, and just does incredible work. He's right there in Town Center. The address is 222 Central Park Avenue. If you want to call Ramon Photography and schedule a beautiful family portrait or whatever you need to get done, or something for your website or something. He does incredible stuff. And his phone number is 498-7366. That's Ramon Photography. So, and anyway, we're going to join our next half hour of our show today, or next 25 minutes or so. We're going to have a reporter from the Marshall Project. If you just missed the show, we're just joined us. I'm George Yates. This is Just for All. And we had, the last 30 minutes, we had Neil Barsky on the show, who was the founder of the Marshall Project, named after the late, great Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. And so we welcome Eli Hager to the show. He's a reporter for the Marshall Project. How you doing, Eli?
Doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. So what are you working on these days? I know you're a reporter. Your biography is you're from the University of Michigan. You got a master's in fine arts from Columbia. So you're one of those smart guys that went to the Ivy League school. So, hey, I'm impressed.
Thanks.
So you worked at Esperanza, which is an alternative sentencing program for youth. So you've got your heart in the right place. What are you working on these days?
Right now, I'm in the middle of a big project that we're about to come out with. That's about child support, and it's about how child support accumulates while parents are in prison, and they often end up leaving prison with 20, 30, even 40 or $50,000 worth of child support debt, and a lot of it, if they pay it, it doesn't actually go to their families. It goes to the state as repayment for welfare.
Okay, so and do they ever even get it repaid?
Well, a lot of times they don't, but it's pursued by the state, by garnishing their wages or by throwing them back in jail. But a lot of times they're too poor to be able to pay it back.
You know, sometimes this child support thing is really scary. I've seen guys that, when they're about something happens and maybe they separate from their families and they've got 4 or 5, they're ordered to do child support. They don't visit with the kids for years, so they think they don't owe the child support. And then 15 years later, they get hit with the bill and it's $35,000 and they're broke. They don't have it.
Right.
But
yeah,
this
that'll
is
happen
different.
a lot. Yeah.
But this is different. You're talking about people that are incarcerated. They have no opportunity. It's not like they're willfully not paying it. They can't pay it. There's nothing in place that puts that kind in abeyance, does it?
No, not exactly. One of the things that the article is about how the Obama administration is actually now considering a new set of regulations that would actually give fathers like these some relief. Essentially the regulations would tell states that they have to give fathers an opportunity to at least reduce their monthly obligation for child support while they're in prison, so that it doesn't spiral out of control like that.
Well, yeah, because ordinarily under the guidelines, if somebody's income drops to zero, their child support drops to zero. If you don't have the money, I mean, why would it be? If somebody's making $20,000 a year, they pay a certain amount of child support. If they pay $100, they pay more. If you're making zero, they're gonna charge you what they call, I guess, an implied ability. If someone's willfully not working, they're gonna make you pay something just so that you'll work. But why can't you, if you're going into, what's the procedure? I guess if somebody knows they're about to go into prison, they can run into court, I suppose, and get a judge to reduce it before they go off to prison. But for these are people who just get locked up and don't have any opportunity to get it reduced. It just stays on the books and runs.
Well, yeah, that's part of the reason. I mean, but actually the main reason is that in most states actually consider incarceration to be a form of voluntary impoverishment. That's the official term that they use. So therefore, it's not an excuse for getting a reduction in your child support. The idea is that it's your own fault that you went to prison. So that shouldn't be an excuse for getting a reduction in child support. But part of what you do,
and it is. I mean, that does make some sense. I mean, you go to prison, and why should you? Oh, maybe somebody. I'm going to go to prison now and get out of my child support obligation. Good deal.
Right. Well, I don't think there's a whole lot of people that would go to prison on purpose just to get out of their monthly child support obligation. Right. But I do think that it does. I mean, the logic makes sense. But if you think about, mothers and children, the logic starts to fall apart because charging these fathers every month while they're in prison doesn't actually help the mothers and children in any way. So, if you think of the child support program as a program for family poverty, it starts to make less sense.
So, and that's what you're working on now. What else is going on? What else is near and dear to your heart going forward?
Well, I've got a number of other projects that we're working on. I don't want to reveal too much about some of the things that we are working on, but one thing that I focused on is kind of the criminalization of poverty and the intersections between poverty issues and criminal justice issues, and then another thing that I've really been focused on is kind of the criminal justice backgrounds of a lot of the presidential candidates and analysis of how criminal justice is going to play a role in this presidential race. Oh, well, now that sounds pretty cool. Let's talk about that. I mean, presidential politics is always sexy to talk about. What are the criminal justice? Let's just go down the list. Who do you want to talk about first? Trump on the Republican side, I guess Hillary and Bernie Sanders on the Democratic side. I can definitely talk about Hillary and Bernie Sanders. Trump doesn't really have a record on. I mean, he doesn't have a record at all on political issues. It's a little hard to. I mean, you can go by his current statements, which are completely tough on crime and kind of reactionary. Right. It sounds like he's from like 1985. The way that he's talking about criminals. Where would if President Clinton came into office in 2017? What would change, you suppose, in the criminal justice system? Well, she's talking the talk now. Back in April, she gave a big speech about mass incarceration and how it's one of the great challenges of our time. But I did a piece about her background on the issue, and she has a real winding history on the issue. She, back when she was a young lawyer, she took death penalty cases. She represented clients on death row, even represented somebody who was charged with rape. And that was kind of what she did. So, I mean, she seemed like she was kind of a criminal justice reformer, but then she got looped in with somebody named Bill Clinton, who had ambitions, to say the least, and he was quickly learning that to become a national figure in the 1980s to be tough on crime. So he famously barely granted clemency to anyone as a governor in his second and third terms, and he famously pursued the death penalty in Arkansas more than it had been under previous governors. And she kind of quieted her earlier instinct for criminal justice reform because his political ambitions were the priority. And then when he was in in the White House, she strongly supported his crime bill and spoke out for it. And the crime bill has been one of the major causes of mass incarceration today. So she has a very complicated record on the issue, but she's now reframing herself as a reformer and reintroducing herself. She's done so many times.
Well, now Bernie Sanders, is he forcing her to make some of these moves to the left, you suppose?
Sorry, you're saying Sanders?
You think, I'm sorry, Bernie, are we talking Bernie Sanders? Isn't he the challenger in the Democrat to Hillary?
Right. Well, actually, that's interesting too, because I've been. When it comes down to it, a lot of these Democrats don't have the strongest histories on criminal justice reform. Even Bernie Sanders, thought of as this remarkably consistent, liberal who's been so liberal for so long. But he's from Vermont. We have to remember, and he's been very pro-gun his whole life. He voted against the Brady bill. And he's been he's been supported by the NRA for his votes, and he's also been pretty tough on crime historically. When it comes down to his votes, he voted for that crime bill. He voted for several of Bill Clinton's other tough on crime bills. And
it's really and I think it's a matter of factual history that the Democratic Party has been instrumental in refusing to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana, which probably more than any other thing has made criminals out of young black people, or on the street corner getting, shaken down and end up with criminal records for nothing. Isn't that true? The Democratic Party really hasn't done much for crime. You would think that, the so-called liberals would have done more, wouldn't you? I mean, I've always been a little shocked that there's not been more of a move to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana until now.
Well, I mean, Democrats for so long were afraid of being soft on crime. I mean, Republicans were reliably tough on crime. Democrats were always kind of being labeled soft on crime.
Right.
Sorry. And so they sometimes even ended up taking tougher stances than the Republicans to kind of avoid that political liability.
Well, that's always been it sounds like, that's why Hillary and Bill, it's just opportunistic, isn't it? I mean, that's what politicians do to get elected. They got to be tough on crime, and we end up with this situation now. What is the story on rehabilitation? We talked a little bit about that. Does anybody get rehabilitated in our prisons today, Eli?
Well, I wouldn't say nobody does. I mean, one of the things that I do at the Marshall Project is I work with writers in prison, people who want to submit their writing to the Marshall Project and get it published, because that's part of what we're trying to do is to publish writing and reporting by people who are actually in prison themselves. And I do read and interact with prisoners who are taking great steps to reform themselves and reflect on their bad decisions in the past, and do seem to be prepared to come out better people for it. However, I think that's their doing. I don't think that's the prison system's doing. There's not a lot of funding for educational programs, and there aren't a lot of opportunities to get outside of the criminal lifestyle, given that that's encouraged in prison, and the violence and the loneliness that characterize prison certainly don't help rehabilitate people either.
Why don't we have more money in the prison systems on education? That seems to me it would be an incentive. We could say, listen, if you pursue a college education while you're here and you achieve a diploma or something, you could reduce your sentence. Or is there anything like that available? I mean, we spend all these millions of dollars, funding so many projects that don't seem to work, and that would seem to be money well spent. Why is there so little money being spent on educational programs in the prisons?
Well, there were originally Pell Grant programs for prisoners, but those were cut in the 1994 crime bill, and recently partially reinstated by the Obama administration. But one of the major reasons is that people who aren't in prison, who can't afford college, tend to be pretty upset about programs like those. They say, wait, the government will fund prisoners' education, but not mine? That doesn't seem fair exactly. So every time higher education for prisoners is proposed, there's actually a lot of public outrage because the state of funding for higher education for non-incarcerated people is so poor as well. So that's a lot of times the politics of it.
Well, now, hasn't Hillary come out and said that she wants to fund community college education for everybody in the country?
President Obama made that proposal. I'm not sure exactly what Hillary's exact position is on that, but I know Obama highlighted that issue several months ago.
I guess if you could guarantee an education to everybody that's outside of prison, then there would be less political problem with giving it to prisoners too.
Yeah, that's true. But all of these things cost money, and when we live in a very conservative economy to a certain extent, there's not a lot of political will for spending more money on projects in general, and it is clear that criminal justice reform of the kind that truly rehabilitates people and prevents people from going to prison will cost a lot of money. So you have to find the political will for that somewhere.
But it costs so much money to incarcerate people, and if you can spend some money to put them back out on the street to where they're not going to come back, I mean, in the long run, you'd be ahead.
Yeah, but the key phrase there was in the long run. I mean, that's where generating the political will is difficult, because you can spend money now and not see the fruits of it for 10 years. That's not necessarily always a politically winning strategy for someone who's trying to win office again in 2 years.
I'm always and on the Republican side, what's the criminal justice? I know Trump's not very easy to figure out, but what's the record of the other fellows running, John Kasich or Marco Rubio or some of the others that maybe have some kind of a track record?
Well, a number of them have signed on to this Right on Crime platform, which is a platform for letting some nonviolent offenders out of prison and making the criminal justice system smarter and putting people who aren't the most dangerous criminals into kind of alternatives to incarceration, as they're called. So a number of them have signed on to that. Rand Paul is actually the one who's been the most outspoken on criminal justice reform. He's not necessarily at the top of the polls right now, but he's been very active in the Senate in terms of pushing for criminal justice reform, and I would say he's the strongest on those issues.
And what does he say specifically, Rand Paul?
Oh, I mean, he takes a very reformist position. He thinks that not only should federal mandatory minimums be cut drastically, which is one thing that many senators have focused on. He also thinks that criminal records should be expunged for a lot of nonviolent crimes so that people can get a second chance. He thinks we should be spending a lot less money on the criminal justice system in general. And he's even spoken out about the situations that we've seen in Ferguson and Baltimore and elsewhere, saying that he understands the anger with police and with the criminal justice system, which is not something you usually hear Republicans saying.
Well, I've got a sentencing hearing coming up in federal court in the next few days, and I've got a mandatory minimum situation in my case. If mandatory minimums are so unpopular with Republican senators and with Democrats and so on, Why in the world do we still have so many mandatory minimums? Why in the world aren't they being abolished if there's seems to be some widespread opposition to it?
Well,
still don't have the votes, I guess. I mean, it's still a majority still a majority in favor, and that's why it's just not happening yet. But it's just just a lot of talk so far. Hello, we've lost Eli. Hello, Eli. We just lost our our reporter, Eli. If you've just joined us, I'm George Yates, and I've spent the last few minutes here with Eli Hager. He's a reporter for the Marshall Project, and this is Justice for All. Our first half hour today, we had an interview with Neil Barsky, who's the founder of the Marshall Project. If you're interested in reading articles by Neil Barsky, by Eli Hager, and the editor of the Marshall Project is a former New York Times head editor. His name is Bill Keller. The Marshall Project is a nonprofit organization focusing on the criminal justice problems in America today, and they've got a website at www.marshallproject.org. So if you're interested in really knowing more about this, the Marshall Project does team with various organizations, the NPR and the Wall Street Journal and so on, to get their articles printed, and they've got some top journalists from all over the country contributing to it. So go online to www.marshallproject.org, and then you can get your email, daily email from them. We've got Eli back on the line. Eli?
Yep.
Okay. We lost you.
Sorry about that.
No, okay. Well, listen, no, I was right in the middle of a question. Now I can't remember what it was.
I think it was about the mandatory minimums.
Yeah. Why is it just a lot of talk so far? Because I just see a lot of people complaining about all of this, that, mandatory minimums are bad, judges don't have enough discretion, all of these things that we've talked about, that Neil talked about in the first part of the show. But is there a political will to make these changes, or is it just a lot of talk?
I think there is a political will, and in the last week we've seen some real progress forward. The Senate Judiciary Committee finally agreed on a bill that was endorsed by the Senate Judiciary Chairman, Chuck Grassley, who has historically been very tough on crime, and that bill now looks set to go to the to the whole Senate, and seems to have a good chance of passing. And then there's a parallel bill in the House, or two parallel bills in the House actually, that are even more progressive on these issues, and I think there is a good chance that one of them passes, and that they eventually get something done. But I think the problem mainly is just the inefficiency of Congress right now. I mean, they can't really pass anything about anything in the past several years. So
yeah, the Republicans can't even pick a leader right now. They don't even know what's going on in their own party. But that's at the federal level. But the vast majority of prisoners in this country are at the state level. So you get some sort of political will from the president or the Congress. That's not going to change what's happening in Virginia or Kentucky, is it?
No, not directly. I think it's definitely true that the focus so far in the full criminal justice reform movement has been on these federal changes, which really are a drop in the bucket when it comes down to it, because so many more people are incarcerated in state prisons than in federal prisons. But for one thing, we have seen a lot of state-level efforts at reform. A number of southern states actually have adopted smart-on-crime bills that have been decarcerating some people and giving them alternatives to incarceration instead. Mississippi, for example, had a huge drop in incarceration last year, and you wouldn't think Mississippi would be a leader on this issue. Utah has also adopted one of these measures. And I do think, to a certain extent, when you have a president who's visiting a prison unlike any other president, and when you have those in Congress focusing on the issue, I do think that does drive what states do. I think there's a leadership element, too, even though it may be indirect.
Yeah, I just heard that Obama visited a federal prison the other day. I heard. I did not catch that on the news. I've been, I guess, living under a rock the last few days. But what was that? Obama went and visited a prisoner in the penitentiary. Tell us what that was about.
He didn't just visit one prisoner. This was a couple months ago, actually, but they just televised it just a week ago. But he visited a federal penitentiary in Oklahoma, and he spoke with I think it was 5 or 6 prisoners about their experiences. They were all nonviolent, low-level drug offenders, which has been kind of the group of prisoners we've been most focused on lately. But he had a good conversation with them and talked to them about how, he's been in situations where he could have ended up in their shoes, which I thought was a very striking thing for a sitting U.S. president to say.
Yeah, you got these. It's a sad thing. I can just tell you stories about, here's some kid, he's on the street and he doesn't have any money, and somebody comes up to him and says, hey, if you just drive this car right here, I'll give you $100. We're going to go over there and do this little thing. And he's got no money, and he's been on the street now for several months. Mom and dad haven't been helping him out, doesn't have education. And for $100, he goes and does something. Next thing you know, he's getting caught, and he's getting a felony, and he's going off to prison. And it's like now his life is just, not over, but he still doesn't have his education. He's just come out of prison. He's got a felony record now. And so to go get $100, he's now got this sort of thing that's going to hang over him forever. You don't get it expunged. That felony record stays with you forever. And what is that? Is there ever a possibility that somebody that gets a criminal record like that could get it off their record? You mentioned something that Rand Paul was in favor of something like that, expunging certain kinds of crimes off your records. People call me about that all the time. They'll say, can I get an expungement of this? And I'll go, well, you found not guilty. And because that's the only thing you can get expunged. If you get it not guilty, fine, you get it expunged. But if it was a conviction, well, no, it stays there forever. I mean, you do your time, you can get your civil rights restored, maybe, but it stays on your record. What's the possibility that somebody could ever get that done to where the record gets expunged?
Well, I'd say a couple of things to that. The first is that at the federal level, there has been some interest in expunging the records of people who committed a crime when they were juveniles. So there's something called the Redeem Act, which would do precisely that, which would help people who committed crimes when they were, 14 or 15, to get those records expunged eventually. And that's something that politicians seem to be able to rally behind because, America's a country of second chances, and it seems particularly unfair to hold people to a decision they made when they were 14. That being said, I don't think there is actually a lot of political will for doing the same for people who commit crimes as adults. There is something interesting called the Certificate of Rehabilitation, which about a dozen states have rolled out recently, and it's basically a process for people who have a criminal record, a low-level criminal record, to go back to court after several years and basically have a hearing and convince a judge that they've been rehabilitated, and then the judge will give them something I'll call the Certificate of Rehabilitation, which they can then present to employers, present to housing authorities, present to licensing boards as proof of their rehabilitation, and those institutions would then be precluded from discriminating against them under the law. So that's kind of a different option. It doesn't expunge your record, but it offers you this kind of proactive document to counter your record, and I think that's kind of an interesting development.
Wow, that's very cool. If you've just joined us, I'm George Yates, and this is Justice for All, and I've been speaking with Eli Hager for the last 20 minutes or so. How do people find out more about Eli Hager? How do they get in touch with you, read your articles? Do you have a website? Can we reach you through Marshall Project? Give us some handles as to how we can. Do you have a Twitter? What's Eli Hager's connections?
Well, I think the best way would be to go through the Marshall Project. You can just go to the marshallproject.org, and then you can go to the section about, it's called People. Then you can click on me. I'm a staff writer, and it has my phone number there, and email, and Twitter, if you want to try any one of those ways of getting in touch with me with comments or responses or ideas for stories or anything like that.
How do you feel about the Marshall Project going forward? It's only been around for a little bit over a year now, 18 months or so, the Marshall Project?
Not quite that long. Actually more like about a year.
And did you join them from the beginning?
Just about, yeah, just about.
And prior to being with the Marshall Project, what was where were you employed prior to that?
I was employed with an alternative sentencing program called Esperanza, and they essentially provide services to young people who have been arrested instead of sending them to Rikers jail. So the idea was to give them counseling service.
Uh-oh, we're losing Eli again. Hello? We lost our guest again. Technical difficulties here, ladies and gentlemen, on Justice for All. Anyway, so while we're waiting to try to get Eli back, is he still gone? He's gone. So we'd like to thank Eli Hager then for joining us on the show today. And it's been a great show the last hour or so, talking with these guys from the Marshall Project. They're very near and dear to the heart of me and my producer. We put this show on every week, and we try to get folks on that are dedicated to making changes and going after problems in the criminal justice system and going for reform. So if you are interested in that sort of thing, and you listen to our show regularly and you listen to some of our guests, you know that a lot of them we have big hitters every week in the criminal justice system. I've had former United States attorneys, law professors from Harvard and Stanford and Cal Irvine and San Diego. We've had several law professors from University of Virginia. We have authors. We have some of the top writers on the United States Supreme Court. And top trial lawyers like Cheney Mason, who defended Casey Anthony, and we've had folks from the O.J. Simpson trial team, and this is the sort of people that we've brought on our show now for the last 18 months. And if you want to listen to some of my other back shows, you can go to my website at ghylaw.com. Or to our YouTube site. That would just be George Yates, host of Justice for All, and that's on YouTube. We got all our shows there. So if you want to listen to the rest of this show or listen to my interview with Bob Fisk, who talked about what it was like to depose Bill Clinton at the White House, or Cheney Mason and how it was like to defend Casey Anthony in the trial of the century, or one of the trials of the century, then go back and listen to some of my shows that we've had over the last 18 months. It's a really kind of a fascinating array of people that I've had on the show, and I'm really thankful to each of them for coming on the show. We had the president of the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers on our show just last week, Jerry Morris, and he was really a great guest to have. And we do have a good long affiliation now with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, who's dedicated to the administration of criminal justice in the United States. We've had, when you look at who we've had on our show, we've had folks from the Innocence Project, Marshall Project. Now we've got with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers, and so many of these folks that come on the show that are dedicated to criminal justice reform. We've got the UVA law professor that wrote the book on eyewitness identification, saying how unreliable it is. And so many people are dedicated to trying to fix things that are wrong with the system. Anyway, it's a pleasure being on the show every week and try to bring out some of these issues. I'm not giving up my day job, folks. I still practice law during the week. So you can call me at 491-8800. If you got any comment about the show, give me a call, 491-8800. That's my law office number. Right, and before we leave today, of course, I'd like to thank Eli Hager, who came to us from the Marshall Project, also Neil Barsky, who's the founder of the Marshall Project. Please go onto their site, marshallproject.org. And before I go, I want to remind you again that Ramon Photography was sponsored my show today, and Ramon is really a great portrait photographer. It's the absolute best photo you'll ever get of you or your family. If you need something for professional or personal reasons, call Ramon Photography, 498-7366. He's at 222 Central Park Avenue, Virginia Beach. He's there at Town Center. That's Ramon Photography. And join us again next week. And we're going to have even Ivan Goldman next week. He's he's got written 2 books, and one of them will be called Sick Justice, and it's about mass incarceration in America. So we'll continue this theme that we've had to try to do something about the problems that we have in the American justice system. Thank you for listening. I'm George Yates. This is Justice for All. Have a great day. Bye now.